Bruno Fernandes finished it. David Raya didn't even move an inch before the ball was in the back of his net.
If he dived, even if he got nowhere near it, would kind of have ruined it.
What we should have our goalkeepers do on those is just hat-tick.
Maybe salute it as it goes past. That's the best thing to do.
You say you've got the beating of me. I salute your ferocity. This video podcast is brought to you by Camarena, the most awarded tequila. And if you're watching us on YouTube, remember to hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming podcasts or our exclusive interviews with Premier League stars all season long. We back! Oh, like Rex Ryan, aka New York Jets, David Moyes. Oh, yes, the Moyes are back in town, and we will break down that delirious groundskeeper Willie Caliber news, as well as the FA Cup wonder which overflow at Liverpool and Manchester City back to winning ways, albeit against a gaggle of gutsy minnows. Tottenham go away to Tamworth, and Big Ange experience it like a trip to the proctologist, emerging intact but only just. And Manchester United really add to Arsenal's woes and existential sense of impotence with a 10-man penalty shootout victory, of which legends are made. 32 games scattered over 4 days in this FA Cup third round. Really a wonderful world of weird. Less football, more a chance for football fans around the world to revel in the obscure delights of the football pyramid and the armpits of England. And who better to probe those aforementioned armpits with than the bard of the borderlands from The Athletic, my friend, the Crown Prince of Harrogate. Oh, it's Mr. Rory Smith.
I don't know how many places in England would like to be referred to as the armpit, Rog, but you'll be offending somebody.
Mate, as someone that comes from very close to the taint, I'd bite your arm off to be the armpit roar. But anyway, FA Cup third round weekend, does that feel to you like your cup is half full or half empty?
I think it's one of those things where you are basically chasing a high from childhood, aren't you? It's something you grew up, certainly people of our generation, grew up being told was special and that you should love and cherish and adore. And every year you try to make it feel special, and you're a little bit disappointed that it doesn't.
God, you've just described 73% of human beings' relationship with their parents. But we'll get to that in our other podcast. Today in Freud. Brought so much football this weekend that we're going to dive up top into the quite seismic news, in this house anyway, made official over the weekend. Sean Dyche is no longer my dad.
He's gone.
Oh, we Everton fans, we're living with Grandpa David again.
You are. I mean, I will bow to you on this one, Rog. How do you feel about the Moyes returning?
Well, on one hand, it may be the most Everton thing that ever Evertoned. Rehiring David Moyes on Saturday and Carlo Ancelotti may be avails the following week. But for those of you who don't remember, I realise this actually happened so early on in our viewership over here's football fandom. This is back in 2013, before the Premier League was even on NBC. David Moyes previously managed Everton for more than 500 games between 2002 and 2013. He guided us to 4 European campaigns. This happened, and the 2009 FA Cup final, which I was at.
And me.
You were?
Yeah.
Was it not fantastic for the first 29 seconds?
It was a great day. It was lovely and sunny. I remember it was really hot at Wembley, and the temperature at pitch side, where it was hotter than anywhere else, was so high that we worried genuinely about the health of Tony Hibbert.
Yes, my God, he melted. I had my, I think, 6-year-old son, Samson, with me. It was so hot. We were right in the front row. And when the teams walked on and they did that fire at Wembley, the fire comes out. The fire, which we were really close to, it cooled us down. It was that bloody hot. I remember that him turning to me being like, Dad, that fire's cooling me down. It was hot. Even by American standards. But this is not about us. It's about David Moyes. He's a man who coined, upon his first arrival, the term the People's Club. Who said you can never go back? I actually looked that one up, and it was the writer. Do you know this, Ro? Do you know who said you can never go back? That deeply inhibiting quote, which is always flung in people's face.
I don't. I mean, it's quite famous, so I'm going to guess Mark Twain.
God, it's Twainy territory. Gotta say, it's Twain ballpark.
Is that right?
It's Twain adjacent.
Adjacent.
It was the writer Thomas Wolfe, who died aged 37 of tuberculosis. So when I thought about that, I was like, sod you, mate. Not a lot of life on which to base this quite sweeping theory. So sod you. I mean, Moyes returns into our heart. in, I will say, Raw, an hour of need it is. We are 1 point above the relegation zone. God, I don't know where this comes from, the Wonder Pets. This is serious, as they used to say. Yes, he's coming, and we'll discuss, for a little longer than we thought, 2.5-year contract. But when you look at the big flow of history, in the last 15 years, and I think the Freakins probably think this, the new ownership group, he's the last Everton manager, really the last in the last 15 years, who built anything of note. He is incredibly, and this is our turmoil, our 9th permanent manager in 9 years. We've got to build foundations again. So how do I think about it, Raw? I think about it like, I've not interviewed him. He's dead, so he's not coming on. Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. You know, a relationship that, yes, changes, evolves, everybody changes, but the love never dies. A bit like, this is a bit creepy, but I think about him like one of those high school crushes that's rekindled over Facebook. You know what I mean? Falls back in love as an adult. It's a terrible analogy. Were you surprised? I mean, I do want to break down some of the elements of this story. I want to honour Dyche. Yes, kind of. I want to talk about the specific challenges facing David Moyes as he picks up this, some would say poison chalice, I'd say beautiful poetic mantle. But you're an objective human being. You're a red. Did you laugh at this news? Or did you shake your head and say, yes, this makes sense?
I know well enough. I've lost enough Merseyside derbies to David Moyes not to laugh at the presence of David Moyes at Everton. I was surprised that Dyche went. I think that's probably fair to say. And I was particularly surprised by the manner in which it appears to have happened, where he seems to have gone to the Freakins, the people now running Everton, and basically made the case that he shouldn't manage Everton anymore. That's a really unusual approach to take. By all accounts, actually, it's from what we have been told, it indicates a genuinely, I know this will sound sarcastic, it's not meant to, like a remarkable level of self-awareness from Sean Dyche, where he basically said to his new employers, look, I feel as though this isn't really working anymore. I'm not getting a huge amount out of the players. They're not responding as I would like them to respond. And it feels to me, Sean Dyche, I should really do this in a Sean Dyche voice.
Yes, and by the way, this is one of the great sadnesses, Raw, of the Sean Dyche conscious uncoupling, is that he's the only impression I can do in football, and we've lost that. So one more time, give it us. Sean went to them and said, what? I'm not the droid you're looking for.
I've taken them as far as I can. That's harsh. He's a nice man, is Sean Dyche. But it's odd. Conscious uncoupling actually is quite a good way of putting it, because he has, I think, been sacked rather than resigned, which means he's got a payoff. That's the crucial bit. He's got the money to which he was entitled in his contract. But it is really unusual for a manager. There's two unusual things, in fact. One is for a manager to say, this isn't really working anymore and I'm not sure how I can fix it. That is genuinely, I think, speaks really well of Sean Dyche that he's identified
it's that. It's a long message to put on a brick which you threw through the Freakins window, that, isn't it?
And just wrapped in an essay. It was the writer Thomas Wolfe who said. But the other is that it's really unusual. It's really unusual for a manager to say that and then still be sacked, rather than the club being like, well, I assume you're resigning then. So it feels a bit like a natural parting of the ways, but it still came as a surprise to me.
It must have been raw. I mean, we knew relations had broken down, were breaking, but to fire him 3 hours ahead of a game,
3 hours ahead of a game, and also in the early in January, when it looked to me like one of those situations where I think everybody involved realised that the ideal scenario would be to wait until the summer. So that element of it surprised me. Obviously, results-wise, it was you, Rog, who told me last week that Everton won 8 games in 2024, and ever since that sort of in like that light bulb moment, I've been mystified by why Sean Dyche still had a job. So in many ways, it wasn't a shock. Whether Moyes replacing him is a surprise, to be honest, given that 24 hours previously Graham Potter had got the West Ham job, no. I think if you looked around and looked at the people who could conceivably be Everton manager in January 2025, once Graham Potter was back in employment, David Moyes was probably top of the list.
Yeah, I mean, there's no Andoni Iraola or Hertzler who's going to arrive at a club like ours in turmoil mid-season with new owners. I think, I'm radically optimistic about this ownership right now, because I have to be, but they're not coming anywhere soon. David Moyes is our gentleman for many, many reasons, and I do love him. I love him as a human being. I'll never forget the way he delivered fruit and veg during the pandemic. That interview and the way he pronounced fruit and veg, go and find it on Men in Blazers. It's just genuinely, it's hauntingly beautiful. But I do want to button the Sean Dyche piece. He was, kind of unceremoniously dumped out of Everton's infrastructure with a statement, let's just say, was short. I'd say sweet, but by sweet I mean ungrateful. So let's start with his legacy, and I use the word legacy quite generously here. The football in the end was really not worth a life worth living. It was tactically rigid, it was dour, it was footballing life in purgatory, 1 win in 11, you know the numbers, we moan about it every week, oh by we I mean me, 1 goal in open play in our last 10, but he kept us in the Premier League twice. Once with all them points deductions, which honestly was an astonishing feat of crisis leadership. No mockery, it really was. We repelled goals. We recently drew Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester City, but the wins were not just there. Those were ultimately his Everton epitaph. Not a bad run on paper if you add some wins to it, which is akin to, I'm not that bald if you add some hair to my waistland. At that moment, he did seem to be taking the piss. You hear about from the players, the training's cursory, no kind of video preparation, no tactical change depending on the opposition. So, how do you remember Sean Dyche? Is it like pint of bitter half empty or pint of bitter half full on what he did at the Blues?
In time, it'll surely be half full, because it's easy to forget quite how relegated Everton should have been in the last 2 years. Like they really should have been relegated.
Very relegated.
Yeah, like properly relegated. Not just, maybe 2 divisions, but there were 2 years in which they looked completely screwed, to be honest. The year when he came in after Lampard, and the year of the points deductions. And he kept them up, to be honest, relatively comfortably in both seasons. And I think what's undone Dyche is probably the sense of among Everton's players this season that, well, hang on, we can't be doing this again. If we're just doing this again, what's the point? And I think Everton went into the season thinking, as I did, I remember saying to you, Rog, that you sort of expected Everton to be 13th this season, a sort of mid-table nothingness season, rather than another relegation scrap. And as they sank into that sort of 16th, 17th zone...
Don't put it in the past tense.
I wonder whether the players thought, well, actually, this is... We just can't do this again. We've put everything into staying up for the last 2 years. There's not been that much change in the side, not much change in the squad because of the finances, because of the stasis brought about by the absence of a takeover. I'm pretty sure, from speaking to people who've been with Sean Dyche in recent months, recent weeks particularly, he did not think he would be Everton manager this time next year. He did not think he would survive beyond the summer. Everybody knew that he'd done his bit. And I think in time, once things have stabilised, once kind of memories have softened a little bit, there will be a degree of gratitude from Evertonians to Sean Dyche, not for what the team became this season, but for the fact that they are in the Premier League to struggle at all.
I think that's beautifully said, Ro. And I love your idea of the year of the points deductions, which sounds like possibly the most harrowing new Joan Didion novel of all time. But it was a deep frustration that emanated from that Everton camp. You got young talents like Nathan Patterson and Jake O'Brien just buried down the depth chart, bleeding away in confidence. The goal scorers just woefully shuffled through. Did feel like we were at the stage of phoning it in management. Safe to say, I think, to encapsulate, there will be no new branch of Burnley's Royal Dyche pub being built in the vicinity of Everton's new stadium. But now David Moyes is back. 11 and a half years since he ditched us for Manchester United. Ultimately a job too big for him. Too big for so many, and maybe not too big, just too surreal. We will see. But older Everton fans, many of them still stung by the way he immediately came back when he left us to try and prize away that angry dandelion Marouane Fellaini and beautiful Leighton Baines, our 2 best players, on the cheap. Lectured Everton that they needed to do the right thing for the player, which was seen in the moment as hypocrisy. We don't forget at Everton Football Club, but how he floundered, struggled humanly in the wake of that at Sunderland. I remember meeting him up there and how dark that really was before eventually stabilising at West Ham. That was a joy. I loved interviewing after him. He jigged down that sideline, danced with his old dad after winning a first trophy. It was like watching Sisyphus, honestly, just get finally to the top of the hill, put the rock down. That magnificent Conference League victory. What should we expect, Ro? We know Moyes football is often missionary position, but the collective fight, it's always at 11.
I don't know if I needed that image in my head, to be honest.
You know it is, though. Right, should we get down to it then?
What makes it so annoying is that it's the perfect analogy for David Moyes' football. This will sound like convoluted logic. You mentioned like Hertzler or Iraola. That this isn't a kind of inspirational managerial appointment in the traditional sense. It's not some young up-and-comer who can transform everything, build a legacy, build an empire. And that is true. But also, I think a team in Everton's position don't necessarily need a wholesale revolution in the middle of a season. That's a really risky thing to do and often doesn't work. So, to me, Moyes represents almost the perfect continuity candidate. He is someone who can be a bit like Dyche, several Dychean principles, won't be a world away from what Everton have been doing, but maybe a little bit more sophisticated, maybe a little bit more advanced, maybe a little bit more kind of varied, with the added advantage of not only being a new voice, but an old voice as well. You know, he will have the fans on side from the first minute. And this sounds, again, like maybe I'm like Coppite gloating, but I think Evertonians are slightly tricky to win over. If you look at some of the managers that have lost popularity with Everton's fans in recent years, it's actually really hard to understand why they've lost popularity. And the one that stands out to me is Marco Silva. I still don't know what Marco Silva did wrong. I still don't really know why he was sacked. But I think because of the history he has with the club, because to me, Everton's self-identity is still basically quite Moyesian. It's the one that Moyes gave the club. That's how Everton conceives of itself, I think. He should have quite a long honeymoon period, really. There should be a degree of well-wishing from Everton's fans. They will want him to succeed. They will indulge him.
You need this to work, Rob.
It does make sense to me, as much as there's a lot of me that thinks, oh, you shouldn't go backwards and, you know, don't look to the past. And, you know, ultimately was a period where Everton sort of sometimes finished sixth. Is that really kind of a golden age worth conjuring? I think where Everton are now, how the football landscape has changed since then, yeah, 100%. If Moyes can make Everton more Moyes again, then that works for everyone.
God, I've got to say, these images were country. You didn't like my missionary position, but you fused that with your long honeymoon, and it's pretty exhausting to even think about. But the way you describe Moyes, essentially you've boiled it down to, it's a new, for the players, it's a new angry man to shout at you, and that will be all the difference. You ask about our self-identity. I think really is important. There's layers to the identity. There's the horror of what we are now, the true horror of just this unmoored club, driven over a cliff by our last mad king owner. There is the Moyesian, we're sixth, we're fifth, we're trying to get into Europe, but we're a massive club in many of the older fans' imagination. My memory as a kid, cups after cups after cups in the 1980s, including European trophies. We were on the verge of becoming one of the best teams in Europe in the mid-80s until English teams were booted out of European play, and in a way we've never recovered. So this present day state has been, before these new owners, the Freakins, it's been shameful. I mean, it really has been. We're like Mashiri, our last owner, absentee landlord, ultimately. Like, we were left like a dog in a rescue shelter, been really bloody badly treated. We were beleaguered. We couldn't understand it. But the first thing we need is someone who loves us, who will bring stability into our lives. And then I do think about the 9 top 10 finishes we had under Moyes. Look, I want Everton to be great again. And I speak to people at the club about this move to this new beautiful stadium, which I've seen with my own eyes, Bromley Moor. It is stunning. It's going to be a massive uptick, 15,000 more tickets every single home game they have to sell. We need to reconnect to that Everton that we were for this to work. We need to reimagine what we stand for, bring along what we are at our core, this traditional club based on passion and history, but we need to become a modern club that wins. So then, is Moyes your Iraola or your Thomas Frank, who plays crackling home football that makes you buzz inside? He might not be all that. Which makes it surprising to me that he didn't come back on a short-term kind of Italian, what do they call it, a tragatore rule? Is that what it is?
Tragatore, the ferryman.
The ferryman manager, the veteran who comes in to save a club on a short-term contract from relegation, get them from one side, I guess, of the river to the other. But man, he's a good man. He's a safe man. He loves the club, demands everything from his players. It's going to take time. It really is, Raw. That's the reality. The failures of this last owner will haunt us for, you'll understand how long that will be. But to have someone who cares, I have seen us win things, many things, but what I want more in these biblical years of famine is, and this is what I think Moyes will bring, and I think it's what many of the fans at Goodison Park, this is the non-negotiable, is some fight. We want a team who tries. We want a team who's better as a collective than they are as individuals and can conjure that idea of football that includes, please God, goals from open play that have become such a rare occurrence. Ultimately, Raw, I think the central tension of this Moyes 2 electric boogaloo thing is going to be the tabloid buzz and everyone's desperate to jump on him. The game's passed Moyes by. He's a dinosaur. He's from the past. Up against the dream of David Moyes restoring Everton to where we were under him, not just relegation fodder. That's ultimately that's where we aspire to be, the fringes of Europe again. I'd say we aspire to be a serious club again, and which is ultimately the first step to being that grand old team of our dreams.
I think the chances are that it won't be Moyes who delivers that iteration of Everton. It won't be Moyes who turns Everton back into a team challenging for the Champions League places. I think that's the gap from where Everton are now to where they would need to be for that to be true is probably beyond him, just because of time. Just because that is maybe a 5, maybe not even a 5. That might be a 10-year job. Let's say 5 to be optimistic, Rog. It's at least a 5-year job. What Moyes can do is lay the foundations of what Everton could yet be with the new stadium, with the new ownership. He is maybe the person to come in and wipe the slate clean, effectively, to build a base, which is what he did before. And the thing that's always fascinated me about Everton, and people would assume that I have a deep-seated loathing for Everton because of my other affiliations. That's not really true. I have a bit of a soft spot for Everton, except twice a year. And I've always thought that the most interesting kind of thing about the Evertonian identity is this split between the school of science, Rog, which is rooted obviously in the 70s, in the beautiful football that Everton played in that period, continued by Howard Kendall in the 80s, and the Dogs of War, which was the team from the early to mid 90s that battled relegation, that fought hard, that scrapped. And I always think that Evertonians, whenever they have one team, they want the other one. So the school of science team of Roberto Martinez wasn't Dogs of War enough. Give them some Dogs of War, and they complain about not being a school of science. I think Moyes has come closer than anybody else for an awfully long time to creating a team that does both to the extent that most Evertonians are satisfied.
The Dogs of Science.
The Dogs of Science, the School of War, if you think about his kind of totemic, canon team, it did have a load of scrappers in it. It was solid defensively, but it also had Mikel Arteta in it. It had Stephen Pienaar in it. It had Leon Osman in it. Leighton Baines as a left back. He always found a way to include artistic players. And if he can do that, in the next 2 or 3 years, he can turn Everton into a scrappy team that have moments of genuine beauty and brilliance, then I think everybody will be satisfied.
God bless you, Rory Smith. You're a big-hearted man. I love what you're hinting, and I don't like to project. You're essentially saying David Moyes stabilises, then Carlo Ancelotti comes back and leads us to the promised land. Everton fans, God bless. Let's just pray for a new manager bounce, which is as tall as a caber tossing. But first, I want to make a toast, which is a change of tone, but a really crucial one. I want to raise my first Michelob Ultra of the day to all the GFOPs across Los Angeles, that great city of magnificent imagination and champions. It has been an agonising experience, so debilitating, watching you all from afar, suffering, the loss, the fear, the chaos, the unrelenting uncertainty. All of us have friends, all of us have family who've been affected. Many have lost absolutely everything, which I cannot begin to imagine. We've got a healthy contingent of staff members here at Men in Blazers who live in LA. Some have been forced to leave their homes. Whole experience, honestly, I said this on Friday, it's put football, the agonies we feel in football really into perspective in a very clear and present way. I want to thank all of the firefighters, the first responders, so incredibly brave, selfless, inspirational. And I hope this show and all our stuff in some way is a fleeting reprieve. We've had letters from so many of you to that effect, and Godspeed to all of you. But I want to say, for those of you who are listening who want to do something, you can go to Mutual Aid LA, which is an incredible network, evolving list of vetted operations doing the Lord's work there. You can find them on the internet. You can also donate directly to the group. I'd encourage you to do so. But I also want to say how incredibly moved I was to read this dispatch from Stu Holden in LA. He wrote about how so many young athletes have been affected, their lives changed, they've lost everything. And Stu wrote, if you have lightly used sports gear, cleats, shin guards, uniforms, football gear of any kind, essentially it's a beautiful message. Stu's receiving it all, distributing it to impacted families, clubs throughout the area. Remember, so many people have lost everything. So if you are a football lover, and you want to rebuild the game in one of the greatest football cities in our nation in its hour of need, we put the link for Stu Holden's document in the podcast notes and in the YouTube notes under this show. I'll just say support that city with your love, your effort, your heart, and just show football-loving kids in their hour of need that they never walk alone. Raw, all of this, it has been a reminder that the greatest pain in your life you feel as a football fan, your sports teams, if that's the biggest agony you've got, you're doing okay in life, right?
Yeah, I mean, the images that we've seen across here of what's happened in California are, hellish and terrifying and incredibly distressing to imagine what so many people, so many hundreds of thousands of people are going through is remarkable. Obviously, it's a trite thing to say. Obviously puts everything else into insignificance compared to having to face that ongoing crisis is unimaginable for so many of us.
To better days ahead for all, and to the football, where we will begin. Arsenal won, Manchester United won, and United won on penalties 5-3 in an epic clash. By the way, I always do believe that the FA Cup draws are done with hot balls when they do the draw raw, so there's at least one massive game per round. Do they say that in England?
There's a long-standing theory that these things are rigged. I would contend that if you look at the third round most years recently, probably not rigged enough, to be honest.
Rory Smith, the contrarian, more hot balls. Anyway, whatever.
No, you can't have. That's the problem. You can't have too many hot balls, otherwise all the balls become hot, and then you can't rig anything.
Cold balls, different temperature balls with a very, very, very accurate, sensitive feel up of things. Kai Havertz is very sensitive to things. Maybe he should do the job.
I'd say you need different textures of balls. That's get some bobbly, some knobbly, some spiky. That's the easiest way.
We'll save this for our other show today in balls. But this gave us however they did it, a rumble between these two epic rivals. I think the two most successful teams in FA Cup history. Both grand in name, both slightly wobbly in present tense. Arsenal reeling after that midweek Carabao Cup semi-final impotency. They were smacked 2-0 at home by quite surging Newcastle in Carabao Cup semi-final first leg action. Arteta's post-match explanation, God love him, that the Carabao ball was, quote, different. I think he listens to our Today in Balls podcast. An FA Cup third round clash. Anyway, it should have felt like a nothing. But suddenly, because of the context, it did carry optical power for Arteta. He wanted to show that his team could summon the finishing, that they could prod away the narrative of negative momentum, that his squad has gone backwards. And God bless, they did take the field wearing their fine tradition of an all-white kit, their admirable campaign against knife crime. And then they tried to assert themselves from the off. Gab Martinelli finishing, but offside. Tempting to counter Manchester United's triangles. Arsenal's thinking on counters was not all that. And that was before poor Gabriel Jesus was carried off on a stretcher after fouling Bruno. He was replaced by Raheem Sterling, who I believe had to be exhumed before coming on the field. Game was a bit dead raw. Half-time XG, Arsenal 0.23, Manchester United 0.07. I did start to wonder in my mind. I thought in the FA Cup they should have special rules where you could sign someone at half time if the game's a bit crap. United probably had signed Brian and Mbumo. Arsenal would probably get Tamworth's long throw king Tommy Tonks in. How many titles would they win with Tonks?
The long throw is an underrated weapon, and there's definitely a future of football in which every team has a long throw specialist, and we realise we've been wasting our time for 140 years not doing it enough.
Yeah, I mean, Tonks, by the way. I think Nicholas Yova probably looks at Tommy Tonks like 1980s kids looked at Pamela Anderson. But then, second half, thank God, United opened the scoring. Miles Lewis-Skelly played the ball a bit like the worst MLS since, well, I don't know. Garnacho ran onto it, rolled the ball quite exquisitely along the edge of the area, like an alley-oop almost, to Bruno Fernandes, who honestly is like a different man right now than the one we saw in the end of the Ten Hag death throes. Finished it, first time, with a technique. It was like whip, power, velocity. The most amazing was David Raya didn't even move an inch before the ball was in the back of his net. It was really a stunning moment.
But it's also a stylistic decision by a goalkeeper not to move, which I always think lends a certain kind of beauty to the shot. If he dived, even if he got nowhere near it, would kind of have ruined it.
Yeah, I think actually what we should have our goalkeepers do on those is just hat tip. They should all wear like caps. Just be like, respect.
Or like maybe salute it as it goes past. That's the best thing to do. Yeah, you got me.
You sir, you've got the beating of me. I salute your ferocity.
But there has been a change in Fernandes in the last. I wouldn't even say it's from the dawn of the Amorim era. It's the last 2 or 3 weeks where he seems to have taken his own kind of public statements about how United's mentality needs to be better. He seems to have realised that probably has to apply to him as well, and he suddenly is looking like the player that he was 2 or 3 years ago. He's been in a real funk for quite some time, Fernandes, in terms of consistency. But now Anfield, he was superb for United a week ago, and now the Emirates, where he played like a captain.
Yeah, and loves an FA Cup goal, that guy. Since he arrived, I think no one has had more than, is 9 goals in the FA Cup, and suddenly a surging football match broke out. Arsenal had to up the tempo. Raz whiffed with a goal at his mercy. Kai Havertz did the same, slicing wide from pretty well near the goal line. United, for their part, didn't keep their head too much as kind of the fire crept into the game. 62nd minute, Dalot, frenzied decision making, I think you file it under, slid right through Marino quite unnecessarily, got a second yellow, and 100 seconds later on the very next attack, United's cup debutant goalkeeper, 26-year-old Turk, Bayan Dia, flailed it across, sent it spinning high into the old London night. I've got to say, this was in a game of sensation, a game that lacked finishing, too sensational finish. Gabriel swooped. By the way, Arsenal so often bailed out by their centre-backs. He kind of went, hips don't lie. And he had the technique to keep the ball down. That's what amazed me about this moment. Came off for United foot on the way, I think, into the corner of the net. But this was just like, this was a sizzling moment.
Yeah, and it felt at that point as though, okay, United are 14th in the Premier League or wherever. They are down to 10 men. They are facing a team who are infinitely better than them at the moment. This will be the point where Manchester United, if not crumble might be a bit too harsh, but certainly have a gentle collapse and fade off gently into the night. And I guess the biggest sort of compliment you can pay to Ruben Amorim's emerging Man United is that is not what happened.
Yeah, by the way, I felt the counterpoint of that. It felt to me like, okay, Arsenal now, against 10 men United, they are going to surge. And they did. Raz Sterling did come to life, use that extra space maybe, crackled around the right. Kai Havertz in the box. Suddenly the consensus in the media is the heroic Harry Maguire, and it was a coming together with the German. Seemed to me, to be honest, that Kai kind of placed his feet into Hero Harry and just toppled over. Bonnie Renee wrote quite beautifully that, quote, Havertz fell over a pocket of air. I don't know how you read it, Raw, but it did make me nostalgic. I'm old enough to remember the days of VAR, and I did miss it very badly for a moment.
Yeah, that's what's fascinating about both domestic cups in England at the moment, is that there is no VAR, certainly until the latter rounds of the Carabao Cup, and I'm not quite sure, I will admit, on what happens in the FA Cup. But it is what football used to be like, both for better and for worse. And in that sense, it does provide quite a useful control sample of what football would be like, the Premier League would be like, if we decided we'd had enough of VAR. And to some people, I think there have been goals this weekend where players might have marginally been offside, and I've seen people saying, well, look, it's fine, because offside is a rule that was introduced to stop attackers gaining an unfair advantage. No one can seriously say that being 2 or 3 inches ahead of your opponent gives you an unfair advantage. And then others might say, well, look, without VAR, maybe penalties that shouldn't be penalties wouldn't be given, and would that not be better?
I'm pretty sure we all just love arguing and just going mad about things. It's not about whether the game's better with VAR or not with VAR, or this. And we'll talk about this in a minute, whether FA gets better with replays or not. We just want to be outraged. Either way, just give us a chance to be one way or the other, and we will grab it. But I mean, the tie was just delicious in this moment. There was so much pushy, shovey. Maguire lip reading, called the German a house, which I just loved. Ugarte made Havertz tumble for real, but then Ødegaard stepped up to take the penalty in Saka's absence. We have to legally say that. Stutter step, word through his stop-starty run-up, only to have Altay Bayandea just redeem himself with a quite fantastic low save to his left. First penalty miss in Ødegaard's career, as they say in the NBA. Ball don't kai. You can kill me later. Game became really one-way traffic, just an orgy of corners. Rice header tipped over by Bayandea. Dogged United rearguard. Quite fantastic De Ligt. Series of mammoth blocks. I only watch FA Cup football for the blocks. Kai Havertz, every chance that came to him. It looks like the gent is back on his old Timo Werner factory default settings. But it was admirably defiant stuff from United. At the end, they even had to throw out Lisandro Martinez up front. They were that shattered, broken, but they hung on. All felt watching it like one of those shot-for-shot recreations of an homage to the Battle of the Bastards. But the honest truth was, second half, one Arsenal player after another whiffed or missed or sliced. Felt like an infomercial for Arsenal's desperate need for a true striker, Raw. That long-needed number 9, every press conference just constantly talked about. And I know Saka's injured, but how does an entire forward squadron go cold, lose their mojo, their confidence, their finishing ability, their nose in front of goal at the same time? And even, is that the manager's fault?
Well, I suppose the cynical answer is that Arsenal have prioritised in recent years signing players who are technically gifted, quick, intelligent, versatile, bright, creative. Players like Kai Havertz, players like Gabriel Jesus, who can be very modern forwards in the sense that they can play across the front line and they can do lots of jobs, and they can be false nines, or they can be proper nines, or they can kind of add to the midfield. But none of them would list their strengths as dead-eyed finishing, and it feels a bit like that might be a problem for them. So if you look at Manchester City, obviously they've got a giant Norwegian cyborg who's quite good at finishing. Liverpool have had players of that ilk before, Roberto Firmino being the best example, who was a wonderful, wonderful footballer, but he wasn't a kind of $25 season player. But they do have Diogo Jota, who is a proper finisher, and they do obviously have Mohamed Salah. Chelsea are trying to turn Nico Jackson into that sort of player, but Cole Palmer is a proper finisher. It's the one thing that Arsenal, particularly when Saka's not there, but even, to be honest, when Saka is, it's the one thing that Arsenal lacked. And I really, I instinctively think we shouldn't say the transfer market is the solution to everyone's problems, and I don't think we should encourage clubs to go and spend £100 million on a player who's not quite right just as he's the best thing available. But it's really hard not to watch Arsenal and think, if you had a truly elite striker, an absolute finisher in your team, then your ceiling would be a lot higher.
Into penalties. Got to say, David Raya, interesting creative technique. Tries to put the shooters off by doing essentially boiled down to doing a horse blow right in front of them and then diving 4 seconds before they kick the ball, which I don't think it was quite as intimidating as he probs imagined. Kai Havertz, God bless, so hesitant. Why always him? Bayandea stayed up late, magic hand to save a slow roller down low. Ultimately, that was the difference. Winning penalty, hit by Joshua Zirkzee, yes. I mean, number one, an immense vote of confidence from Amorim that he'd sent him up in the clinical moment. A gent mocked by United fans when he was substituted in quite harrowing circumstances. I think it was like the 33rd minute he was withdrawn from the game, which was a shattering blow. As he walked up here, I mean, the surreal pressure, the narrative on that gentleman's shoulders. He was cool from the spot, crashed home the winner, giddily machine gunned down the entire crowd with his quite awful celly. I mean, narrative wheels within wheels there, Raw. What pressure must have been in his head in that moment?
Well, an intense pressure, because I think most United fans had assumed that the moment against Newcastle, when he was taken off after 33 minutes, was basically the end of his Manchester United career. That whether it was intended that way or not, it seemed to be Ruben Amorim not just saying, I got my selection wrong, but pointing at Joshua Zirkzee and saying, that guy is what was wrong with my selection. And I'm not sure, in the immediate aftermath of that game, whether most United fans would have assumed they'd ever see Joshua Zirkzee in a red shirt again. I think the presumption was, right, well, they'll loan him out to Juventus, he'll go permanently in the summer, never mind, see you later. For him to be back in the team, for him to be given a position of such responsibility, for him to have the confidence to take it, all of that speaks really well, mainly of Zirkzee, to an extent of Amorim as well.
God, and you put adding layers to his celebration, which was the waving. I thought it was waving bye-bye to the Arsenal fans and their FA Cup dreams. But as Trent Alexander-Arnold has taught us, every good celly has deeply layered meaning. At that final whistle, United's official account tweeted in all caps, "Justice!" Which, as I say, in this era of global concern about the rule of law, felt a little bit hyperbolic. And anyone who listens to the show... What
was the injustice? I mean, the penalty was maybe not a penalty, but Arsenal missed it. So it's not that, is it? So what's the injustice?
Oh, mate, I don't know where to begin. Glazers out. I don't know what it is. But on this show, Raw, we don't stand for hyperbole at all. We have no place, no space for it. But I will say that heightened emotions were deeply understandable. Watching that game, 61 minutes with 10 men, a win on the road where there's been so much bloody misery, heroic fight, a 26-year-old Turkish goalkeeper who's arrived. I think he came in 2023 but chose this moment to make his presence truly felt, a real masterclass performance. He'll almost become a cult hero in United fan lore now. But the big picture, you kind of started to hit this, was Ruben Amorim's 10-men Manchester United. They delivered for the manager. There are battles ahead. Club's finances are a mess. There's rumours they're going to have to sell youth products like Garnacho and Kobe Mainu just to be able to buy. But for today, Raw, the holders are through. Second weekend in a row. You're starting to see the crackling Amorim effect. A battling game plan, shape, fight, leadership, which have been absent for far too long.
So United's next game is against Southampton. And United will beat Southampton, Rog, because Southampton are terrible. And that game might well end up 4-5, 6-0, something like that. And there will be a tendency to look at that and say, this is what Ruben Amorim's Manchester United want. This is what he wants his team to be. This is what, the new United look like. I actually think the last two games, which have effectively been a draw at Anfield and a draw/win on penalties in a competition United don't really care about as much as the Premier League, they're much more useful for Amorim, because it's maybe not exactly how he wants his team to play as like a blueprint for every game. But in terms of the basic stuff, the building blocks, like we talked about with Moyes, the fight, the desire, the character, the mentality, all that stuff, they've had a chance in the last 10 days, say, to showcase it perfectly. They are the non-negotiables, I suppose, of what Amorim will want from his team. He's trying to set a tone now. And for the time being, that won't be Manchester United, the all-conquering, swashbuckling team that we remember from the 1990s and the first decade of the 2000s, the aughts, as Americans call them. But they are what you need if you're going to build something from the ashes of this great team. That you need some kind of set of expectations, effectively, to say that is what we have to do. And if they can build on that, if they can use those as a starting point, then I think that's when you will start to see kind of what Amorim wants Manchester United to be.
For Arsenal, I mean, vibes going in their different direction. They smell a little bit of nagging fear, bleeding momentum, strange sense of decay. The inquest, immediate, profound. Tottenham arriving on Wednesday could not be worse timing-wise for them. Arteta said post-game, it's unbelievable. We deserve to win the game by a mile. I mean, I can probably break down for Mikel why they didn't win. That team looking so predictable, uncreative, lacking in confidence to their core. 180 minutes, I think, is it James Benge worked out that they've created 6.41 worth of XG and scored just that one goal. Jesus, latest player added to that lengthy injury list. Games coming thick and fast. There's a real feeling of that you can almost hear, sense the noise of an unravelling there at Arsenal. The fan base starting to talk about how maybe, yes, Arteta's taken us from deadwood to contenders, but can he take us that next step? And because we've talked about this a lot, in fact, the whole podcast is essentially a conversation about this human trait, and football exemplifies it at the moment. That football only deals with extremes. Arteta either has to be a winner or he's a total fraud. There's nothing in between those two settings. We don't take in the injuries, that they're still second in the table, that there is still so much to bloody play for. Where are you, Raw, between hope, belief, and cynical disdain?
Well, it's really hard to say anything other than it's been a bad week for Arsenal. That they are still at the point in their kind of journey under Mikel Arteta where I think trophies are important. You need to start. He won an FA Cup in his first year, I think, at Arsenal, and that proved a little bit of a false dawn, or certainly not like an immediate dawn. There's no question there's been huge amounts of progress since then, but there comes a point where you need to start capping it off with actual victories in actual things. And no Arsenal fan would have claimed the League Cup or the FA Cup with their priority this season, nor should they have done. But to be knocked out of the FA Cup in the third round with a home tie, that's pretty bad. To lose 2-0 at home to Newcastle in the Carabao Cup when you are within, spitting distance of a final at Wembley, that's also a bit of a blow. So it has been a bad week. But I've got to say, I find the stuff about kind of Arsenal's slump in momentum and, have the team not progressed, I think it really doesn't belie the reality of where they are. If you look at the fixture list in the Premier League, Arsenal's next few months are quite nice. And I would expect them to, if Arsenal cannot get 6 more points over the next 3 months, 4 months than Liverpool, then perhaps there is a bit of a problem, but I think they can. And the other thing is the Champions League, where they are sailing towards qualification without having to play the playoff round. They will be one of the 5 or 6 teams who are capable of winning the biggest competition on the planet. I just don't think it's that bad.
Bite your arm off for the next 6 months being, quote, nice. I will say it doesn't get easier for Arsenal this week. They got the arrival of Tottenham, Aston Villa at the weekend. That North London derby, honestly, they should just have a knife fight between Kai Havertz and Timo Werner. Be genuine. Let's just get it over and done. It'd be like watching German Cameron Fry arm wrestle German Millhouse, and I would love it. Talking of Tottenham, Tamworth 0, Tottenham 3. Never in doubt. All right, we needed extra time, and I want to be clear up top. I am proud to be a Tammy. What a spectacle this game was. Tamworth, first of all. The Lambs compete in the National League, the 5th tier where Wrexham came from at the beginning of Welcome to Wrexham. They're currently 16th. I think they were the lowest team left in the competition. Market Town in the West Midlands, 40 miles northeast of Birmingham, beating 2 League One teams to get there. They play at the quite delightful Lamb Ground. Holds 4,963 people, just 518 of them in seats. This is old school grassroots football. We delighted. Where were Spurs getting changed in an old worn dressing room with an electric heater? It was like coffin sized. Big Angie's boys came in and I think they'd only won 5 of the last 12, so there felt like a surreal banana skin quality to the whole thing. Beautiful stories. Tamworth's manager Andy Peaks had to choose the FA Cup over a short break with his wife at their Shropshire holiday hideaway. Sophie's Choice, Tamworth squad, part-time footballers, the team of accountants, a zipper salesman, bricklayers, teachers, a Zara employee, retail workers. This is the wonder of the FA Cup. It really is. I mean, it's less a football game. This was like watching one of those reality TV shows of the early 2000s. What was it? Wife Swap, where they switch up 2 families who are like polar opposites, class, political persuasion, professions, all for the viewers' delight.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that Britain is the country that gave the world like Henry IV. It gave the world Dickens, gave the world Milton, and it also gave the world the TV show Wife Swap. So massive cultural impact. Yeah, this is the appeal of the third round of the FA Cup in particular, the FA Cup in general, that you do get these massive mismatches, and You get these teams who are semi-professional or barely professional, players who are holding down other jobs, players who are kind of professional in the thinnest, narrowest possible definition, playing Son Heung-min and some of the biggest stars in the world, Dejan Kulusevski. And it's particularly pronounced when the big team goes to the little team. And that is why people are so protective of it, because there are not many contexts in which, and in this case it was Tamworth, the everyman can face the elite. It's the idea that you too, it's essentially, we used to have an advert here for the National Lottery where it was like a giant finger came out of the sky and pointed at the person who in the advert was the lottery winner. And it's a bit like that in the FA Cup. It could be you. Like, you could potentially be on the pitch facing Dejan Kulusevski. You are represented by Tamworth in this case.
Yes.
And that is quite a compelling pitch. It's what.
By the way, it's how I feel whenever I watch Everton.
Exactly, you two might as well be on that pitch.
Yeah, we are the Tamworth.
But it is really special, and it's why it's really easy to sneer at the generation of fans who still lionise and fetishise and adore the FA Cup as old. It feels old-fashioned. It feels the sort of thing we should all have grown out of a little bit. We should really have accepted that the world has changed, and that's not a bad thing. Change doesn't have to be good or bad. It can just be
smell of
change.
mothballs.
But at the same time, that's quite nice to think of, semi-professional players playing against Tottenham Hotspur and doing it really well. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the energy was buzzing in this game. The fans behind Tottenham's bench were so bloody close they could actually bang on like the tin roof of the dugout, which was probably a bit intimidating. Got to credit Ange. Respect to the man. He was actually totally in his element. There's like a video of the fans calling him a wanker to his face, and he's just soaking it all in. He's just loving everything. This is football.
It's who we are, mate.
Yes, it is. We're wankers. The 5-minute delay because the net was broken. Which was a wonderful moment. It needed the Tamworth goalkeeper and I think their tallest defender to kind of tape it back together. The game on a 3G synthetic pitch, it was real cup tie stuff. It was stretched. In the opening, the ball bobbled everywhere. Tamworth environment, plus Spurs injury list, plus Big Ange's tactics, gave Tamworth a lifeline. They defended well. They had Timo Werner, who was playing up top, but didn't honestly give them much of a challenge. And Tamworth, we've got to mention it, they had a big weapon of their own. Really a delightful FA Cup third round story, if there ever was one. Up there with your pie-eating goalkeepers. Their secret weapon is a quite gloriously named ball king, 33-year-old Tommy Tonks. And his long throw. We learned that Tommy Tonks is a part-time sandwich seller. The fans sing, "He got no hair and we don't care, Tommy Tonks." And he can throw the ball 144 feet. And by the way, the name honestly feels like he chose a nom de plume or a nom de throw. It is like something out of Central Casting, the creation of Tommy Tonks rule.
Tommy Tonks is the name that an AI machine would give to a non-league footballer. I don't think you can prove. And do you know what? A long throw is
if that's what they come up with.
A long throw is the specialist weapon it would give him too. So I think we need to investigate whether Tommy Tonks has been written by ChatGPT. It's the only possible explanation.
Everything about him. It was like a character that you create for lols. When you're playing on NBA 2K, you just create just like a hilarious looking character. Tommy Tonks was that. By the way, I did mention this before. We all think Arteta is going to go for, a glamorous number 9. How many millions do you think Arsenal will come in and pay for Tommy Tonks? I mean, they could score from something other than just corners if that gentleman is playing in the midfield.
Nicholas Jova would see him as the most creative footballer in the world.
The options.
Yeah.
The set play, a whole new playbook, a whole new world. I mean, just how many titles would you be defending? Arsenal, get me Tonks, says Arteta, slamming door. 0-0 at half-time. At Football Jarhead wrote on our Instagram, this game is great and terrible. I love it. Felt the same, really, into the second half. Spurs up the tempo, brought on Solanke, the quite hungry, and Limmy Bergval. seconds ticked on. Really was a knife fight between winning and I think the most enduring possible humiliation for Spurs. Tamworth fans chanting "sacked in the morning," which must be the most sackiest of being sacked in the mornings at Ange. By the way, to beat Liverpool in the Carabao Cup semi-final midweek and then struggle against Tamworth, is that like if there was an aftershave called the Essence de Tottenham, is that what it would smell of? But
the thing is that there's no winning in this situation for a Premier League team because to Tamworth that is the game of their lives. So obviously they make it quite hard, and we saw that in other games this weekend where teams that should have been hopelessly overmatched actually stood up pretty well. Maybe not Salford City, but quite a lot of them stood up pretty well against far better opposition. Spurs got through it in the end. They didn't concede a goal. It's a bit embarrassing to have drawn, but then that is kind of what the FA Cup is about. The FA Cup third round is a calvary. It's like a form of torture that big teams have to go through. So Spurs, particularly in the light of the Carabao Cup first leg, which was a superb result, on a patchwork squad, the fact that Spurs struggled, maybe not that much of a shock, although that said, they probably shouldn't have had to go to extra time.
God bless. And they did go into extra time. They brought on the Sonny, Kulusevski, Jed Spence also came on, and they scored goals regularly and often. First one honestly reminded me a bit of that Dutch goal against Argentina, the poor man's Kuppenheimers to Wout Weghorst, where they slip the ball on the free kick. Everyone's expecting to be banged, and you just do a tiny little slip pass and some quick feet. Tamworth suddenly looked, yes, like a non-league part-time team who were utterly shattered. Spurs killed off the game, and honestly it all felt slightly harsh on Tamworth, the final score, but even harsher for many critics was, I'm old enough to remember last year and the hundreds of years before that, where if there was a draw in the FA Cup third round at full time, there would be a replay, and that replay, or the lack of one, deprived Tamworth of, we were told, $1.2 million in extra revenue. The players having the delight of going up to Tottenham and playing in their very plush stadium. But that money would be probably a couple of seasons of operating costs. Where are you on this, Raw? Because I also remember the deep anger that was held over the last 5 seasons, fans bemoaning replays because they clog up for the big teams and the big teams only, the oversaturated football calendar.
Well, funny if you say that about the big teams and the big teams only, and that is true. That's why they've been taken away. But they're also a problem for teams in all 3 divisions of the EFL, because those are 24-team leagues, which means they have 46 games to get in anyway, and they're much more likely to be affected by the weather. So you do tend to get massive fixture backlogs throughout. Sorry, something just came and touched me on the leg. It was a dog. It terrified me. You do get massive fixture backlogs throughout the leagues. I am torn. I think Tamworth Spurs is a really good example of why we should have replays for the reasons you just mentioned. That is a huge opportunity for the players and for the club. But then Arsenal Man United is a really good example of why replays are a bad idea, because what you end up with is a really fun game in which both teams are trying to win it in 90 minutes, and you then get dramatic extra time and penalties, which is ultimately, as a neutral viewer, a really good spectacle. Would I be enthralled by the prospect of United Arsenal at Old Trafford a week on Tuesday? Not so much. So I don't know. I wonder whether you could even make the case that replay should be optional. That if you have a team in a lower division drawn against a team in a higher division, the team in the lower division gets to make the decision. Do you want there to be a replay if it's a draw, or do you want to go to extra time? I
thought you were doing the rational thing and suggesting that we neutrals have a little button in this era of social media where we can vote whether we want a replay or it should
That's a great idea, yeah. Like, if it gets to 17 minutes and you can press your red button or whatever, and you like can
the Masked Singer, we can all vote in.
Yeah.
Vote from home if you want 90 more minutes of this crap. I've got to say, Godspeed Tamworth, and to all your Tamworth fans listening, you didn't win. But you did create a local legend, that team that you should be so bloody proud of, that will become a bit bigger and bigger and more Tommy Tonk size with every single telling and retelling. And guaranteed also, I thought of this in the extra time, guaranteed a couple of times a year, or for the rest of his life, Ange Postecoglou will just snap up in bed in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, and his wife will ask, she'll be like, "Oh, what's wrong, love?" And he'll be like, "No, nothing, mate. because I'm sure Ange calls his wife mate, and he'll realise that he's just having that recurring nightmare that he does. We all do. His will be what it felt like to be in that coffin of a locker room at the Lamb ground at half time, trying to talk seriously to his players about what they needed to do to get out of there alive.
Yeah, it will be. It's a hurdle that Spurs will be glad to have cleared. But as I say, you can't. If they'd won that game 7-0, it wouldn't have been. It's not like anyone would have said Tottenham were brilliant against Tamworth. You can't win in these occasions. You just have to get through them. That's all that matters.
If I called my wife mate, she would end me. Liverpool 4. Accrington, Stanley 0. Arna Slot navigates his first dalliance of FA Cup action in fine style. In the middle of a mini wobble, we should say. The United draw, the Carabao Cup flail against Spurs midweek, Nottingham Forest upcoming on Tuesday night. This was a game that really was about everything and nothing. Liverpool, I think, were 1 to 200 odds favourites going in. Accrington Stanley, 5 places off the foot of League Two in the 4th tier. They went bust in the 1960s, brought back to Football League life off the money they made from a fame commercial that you learn far too much about every time they play. Turns out one of the child actors in it grew up to become imprisoned, I think for manslaughter. But back to Accrington. Brick-making industrial town, 45 minutes from Liverpool. Team essentially full of scousers, not good enough to play for Liverpool, not even good enough to play for Everton. Liverpool rested their front line. A debut for 16-year-old attacker Rio Ungamoa. 16 years, 135 days. I think Liverpool's youngest ever starter. What a whirling ball of unbridled energy. Trent given an opportunity to play himself back into form. Captain's armband too. Liverpool just rolled the first time Accrington attacked. They let themselves open, full length of field attack. And the moment of the match, stroke of half time, it was Trent stepping up from Steph Curry range just outside the area. Perfect form, smacked the ball with angst, anger, venom. No doubt been building up since he was single-handedly scapegoated for the entire Manchester United draw. Raw, that ball, it spun, it flew, it twisted, it buzzed. I don't know about you, I could hear like 1,000 Scouse voices screaming, "We love you, Trent, we never doubted you, don't leave, Trent."
But he's always had that. He's always been capable of that. And, you know, the trade-off that Jurgen Klopp always used to talk about this, that there's a trade-off. You can't have a right-back who can do that and a right-back who, you know, is also standing 30 yards further towards his own goal, putting tackles in at the same time, or, you know, covering on the counter-attack. That's always been what Alexander Arnold does. It's always been the case that you have to take what he can't do or what he doesn't do as the cost for the things that he does do. And I find it very odd that anyone would think it's not a perfectly reasonable transaction.
He celebrated with arms outstretched. Aren't you entertained? Or was it the Jude Bellingham Sally Raw? Was he sending a message? Which message was it? Conspiracy theorist expert Raw, can you just quickly weigh in?
I don't think Jude Bellingham can claim the arms outstretched celebration as his own. I've got to admit, I saw
Cole Palmer invented it, right?
And I didn't. I think Morgan Rogers invented it. I didn't get that subtext, I would admit. But maybe you're right.
Oh my God, that's all I think about. By the way, I love this new Cole Palmer business. Just trademarking every Sally. It's like being in the record industry and owning the publishing.
Yeah, he's worked out. He's found a loophole. He can claim. He can patent all of them.
He's going to retire just off the money he makes from suing footballers who put the ball up their shirt and do the rocking the baby.
Yeah,
he invented
the baby cradle. Yeah. Invented by Bebeto.
He invented babies. Cole Palmer invented babies. By the way, the fans, they did their rendition of Scouser in the team. Rest of the game commanding. Liverpool even threw on Federico Chiesa. Ultimately scored 91st minute. Really a genuinely lovely moment for him. 27-year-old Italian. Injury since he came, lack of playing time. You can tell by his reaction what it meant to him, Raw. Just relief, joy. You can tell the celebrations of his teammates that they love him too. I'm sure Chiesa grew up in Genoa as a young child, and his childhood dream was to score in the FA Cup third round against Accrington Stanley.
Genoa and Accrington Stanley have got a long-standing rivalry, so it meant a lot to Federico Chiesa.
To the bricks.
It was nice, but it's really hard to see how it leads to anything, just because he's not going to get game time reliably unless he might be thrown on for 15-20 minutes if Liverpool are winning heavily, and at the moment in their lead form they don't look like winning heavily. So I do worry a bit about whether Federico Chiesa will ever get his moment in the sun at Liverpool.
God, Liverpool, gird their loins now. Nottingham Forest away on Tuesday, the only team who've beaten them in the league. Accrington Stanley depart. They got 45% of the 60,000 gate. Their managing director told The Times that money they hope to net about 425k. They said is the difference between being in the red and the black. So even as they lose, it's a win. Great day out for them. Memory that their fans, their players will remember. So many other fans came. They unveiled a banner. I think there were 5,000 of them at Anfield. Unveiled a wonderful banner which said Accrington 1878, the first to wear red, which I love. I also love this. Manchester City 8, Salford 0. Game with all the intrigue of Alabama playing the Kent State Golden Flashes. For City, sweet because it was a third straight victory, but also that win against Salford City, a club with its own history, its owners plucked from Manchester United's days of ascendancy. The owners include David Beckham, Ryan Giggs, the Neville brothers, but with 65 places between League Two, Salford and England's champions. Really the closest thing between the two teams is the 5 miles that separates them geographically. Salford, an industrial town on the Manchester periphery. The old goat called it the meat is murder derby. And it was really a comfortable canter. Doku, 2-goal, 1 assist, knife. 22-year-old local product. James McAtee got a hat-trick. They call him Salford Silver, which I love. And yes, this happened. Jack Grealish's first goal for more than a year, 393 days from the penalty spot. So lovely to see him smile again. The Bear Jew 88 insted us. I think he's finally over the treble hangover. But the real big news, Raw, post-game, Pep Guardiola confirmed Kyle Walker has asked to leave Manchester City so he can, quote, end his career abroad, which was quite a symbol, the end of an era, really, for City. Kyle, at his peak, one of the greatest right-backs in the Premier League's history, 6 titles in 7 years. This season, struggled as a player, as a captain, swagger and pace gone, decision-making awry, a one-man symbol really of the club's confused decline. And we do need a blast on him, Raw, because he is a complex character off the field. Just, let's just say, a slew of quite turgid personal scandals, private life in turmoil. But on the football field, whenever I asked a footballer who was the best defender they had to play against, guaranteed 9 out of 10 players over the past 5 years, they'd always, without having to miss a beat, they'd always say Kyle Walker.
Yeah, and I mean, he does a podcast now, which is a surefire sign that his career is coming to an end, called You'll Never Beat Kyle Walker. And that is that is kind of how people thought of him. He has been, until the last couple of years, quite an undersung part of the City machine. He has been the best right back in England, the best pure right back, not a sort of unorthodox right back like Trent Alexander-Arnold, for 10 years at least, since before he moved to City. When he was at Tottenham, I remember watching him, and the old press box at White Hart Lane, Spurs' old ground, was really, really low down. So you were basically at foot level on the pitch. And whenever Kyle Walker was playing on your side, you'd see him hurtling up and hurtling back and hurtling up. And I remember thinking that it was a bit like watching someone do parkour. Like, he'd just jump over tackles, jump sort of 3-4 feet in the air. He had this incredible sort of physicality and a defensive ability to, sometimes at that stage, to play himself into trouble and then use his pace to get out of it. He was a remarkable player to watch then. And at City, he's matured into a really elite defender. I'm not as sold as everybody else on this idea that Kyle Walker has, in inverted commas, gone. I think Kyle Walker, even with the pace dialed down to kind of 7.5, 8, is still a far better defender than most of his rivals. It makes me wonder if, I think he wanted to leave a couple of years ago because of that sort of turbulent private life. He was hoping to kind of get away from the media scrutiny a little bit. I wonder how much that has played its part. I remember when Gary Neville retired at Manchester United, it was basically on the back of one game where he got kind of picked apart at West Bromwich Albion, and he decided he wasn't good enough to play football anymore. I wonder whether Walker has lost his confidence a little bit and he's struggling to get it back. It feels a shame that he should kind of slink out of the door in January rather than being applauded off the field at the Etihad at the end of the season. You know, guard of honour, standing ovation, you know, garlands and roses, all that stuff. It feels a shame that it might just end kind of under cover of darkness almost.
Yeah, much more to that story to come. A lot of transfer rumblings around City, a lot of cash about to be splashed. I think cash can only be splashed in the January transfer window, including a centre-back, Abdul Kadir Kuzanov from Lyon. City also very close to signing Eintracht Frankfurt, quite majestic Egyptian goal machine, Omar Marmoush. So do not count them out of title contention just yet. Be the most pep thing ever. Aston Villa 2, West Ham 1. Got to quickly touch upon. Welcome back, Graham Potter. 20 months out of the dugout. Poor bloke, honestly. Looked like he'd fix West Ham within 9 minutes when Lucas Paqueta side-footed home. We're going to say West Ham did look more organised, more energised by Somerville, more new manager bouncy. But Villa celebrating their 105th anniversary in quite exquisite sponsorless old black kits. Fought their way back, 2 goals in 5 minutes, safely navigated, I think, one of their 7 games in January. Just their second FA Cup game that they've won in 9 years, Villa. But in terms of Potter, raw, big picture, this game irrelevant, I think. But the challenge at West Ham is steep. He's got to conjure an identity from a fairly rudderless team. He's got to find goals. Won't be helped by the fact that 2 more strikers went down. Nicholas Füllkrug with what appears to be quite a serious hamstring problem. The beautiful effervescent Somerville also out now to add to Jared Bowen, who has been their talisman, out for 2 months with a broken foot. Mikel Antonio, obviously unavailable after his trauma, his car accident trauma. And so much of the money that the club had was kind of blown in a garbage can, set on fire this summer. They kind of blew $150 million on 8 players. And I love Graham Potter. I think he's super smart. Unlike most people in football, he's very aware that there is more to life than football. He's like a cultured gentleman. He has non-football friendships that he likes to talk about. But raw, West Ham and Graham Potter, this is a man who fell apart at Chelsea Football Club. This is an odd choice because when you think of alignment, this is the opposite of alignment that he stepped into.
Yeah, and that's what he thrives on. He's a great manager in a defined structure, and that's how he succeeded at Brighton. And you can make the case that Brighton have never really improved on what Potter did. They've been able to match it under De Zerbi and to an extent Hurtzler, but Potter probably the high point really of what they were. And West Ham are a bit of a basket case, and they always have been. They have a mismatched squad, that kind of quilt effect, I suppose, where you've got lots of players bought for lots of different reasons and lots of different managers, some of whom never arrived. An ownership that seems to lack kind of long-standing, long-term vision. A sporting director, the German Tim Steiten, who I think has now been banned from the training ground by 2 successive managers. Which
at least he's consistent.
It's not a great sign, is it, really? But that said, I actually think I kind of think this one makes sense. I think that West Ham have got this issue similar to Everton in terms of the fans want a team that is scrappy and brave and courageous and physical, but they also want to see a degree of kind of sophistication and decent attacking football. And I think Potter probably sits just on the right side of that line. He is a project manager. He will have a vision of what needs to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. I guess the test is whether he is given time to implement that vision. If he is, I think it might be quite successful. They shouldn't go down this year. They should be safe realistically already because there are teams below them who won't catch them. That might buy him a little bit of time. That might enable him to get off to a good enough start to build something at West Ham.
Godspeed, Graham. Oh, we've got to talk about Newcastle 3, Bromley 1. A magnificent moment, and it really was a moment. League 2 Bromley on 8 minutes took the lead at St James's Park. Really fine goal too. I think 20-year-old Swansea loanee Cameron Congreve lashed out. Bromley fans, total limbs, you have to legally call it. St James's Park, they bang the fans up super high. They're flinging their rubber sex doll around while singing "We're going to Wembley," which I just love. That kind of just dream big dreams and have them shattered. There goes that dream then, because the moments were fleeting. That moment, which is, I wonder where it ranks for Sunderland fans in terms of their top 10 moments of the year. Soon cancelled out, couple of tune bangers. I don't know about you, Raw, but to me, you laughed at the magic of the FA Cup. I know it's like mocked and derided, that cliche in England. But for me, the true wonder of the weekend. I mean, the tournament is in need of a reinforcing of its identity, let's be clear. But if there is a magic, to me it was this weekend. Sunday, my Sunday went a bit like this. After being a lifelong Tamworth fan for like 120 minutes, all of a sudden I felt inside a feeling of like having vague Bromley family roots that just turned me into the maddest Ravens fan for like the first 45 minutes. I've lived long laid dormant within, and it was magnificent.
But it's not hard to see what the appeal is it? Because Bromley, who've only, this is I think their second season in the Football League, they will not get another chance to take the lead at St James's Park, which is one of the great kind of cathedrals of English football. And even though they didn't win, even though Newcastle came back to beat them, that is something that will mean something to Bromley's players, to the management, the staff and the fans for decades. And that is, it's really important that English football has a competition in which that can happen.
Godspeed, FA Cup, we adore you. Other games, massive upset, actually a real one at Fortress G-Tech. Worst defence in the Championship, Plymouth Argyle overcame one of the most potent attacking operations in the Premier League, albeit with a weak inside. Brentford were defeated by the Pilgrims, 1-0, bottom of the table in the Championship, rock bottom, just consciously uncoupled from Wayne Rooney. Their American owner, Simon Hallett, a wonderful human being, childhood fan, made money in the United States, brought the club of his childhood dreams. After listening to this podcast, to be clear, true story, you can Google him, he's been on many times. So happy for that man, so happy for the fan base. They deserve this. Their form has been so unbelievably bad for this season that the very second that games kick off on the road, the fans start singing, "How crap must you be?" I paraphrase, withdrawing away, which I just adore. Plymouth's reward, Liverpool arrive way down south in the tip of England's western toe in the next round. Savour these moments. One quick note on Brentford. Yes, they got Manchester City and Liverpool as their next two games. But when you don't start Mbumo, Norgard and Collins, which I think they did in the Carabao Cup as well, and getting dumped. When you're comfortably safe in mid-table and you're denying your fans like the ridiculous odyssey of a cup run, do you see it as rational, Raw, in this age of kind of like data-driven economic decision-making? Or is it just a bit sad, the denial of romance?
Well, the second one, absolutely. I'm not sure to what extent in Brentford's situation, and there's a couple of other clubs like this, you can even make the case that an FA Cup run might damage their league position. What else are the players going to play in? It now just means they have a few weeks off, which, all right, might help, but it might also hinder them in terms of momentum lost and stuff. I find it really odd that there aren't more teams who get to January, think we are between 8th and 14th, the FA Cup is our best shot at a trophy, and you never know, some of the big teams might not take it that seriously. We may well be able to kind of make genuine progress and give this season some purpose. I find it baffling that more teams don't do it.
We're going to find out Thomas Frank loves golf or something like that. Matt Turner started for Crystal Palace, had 4 saves and a clean sheet. Solid performance, along with US men's national team teammate Alabama's finest, Chris Richards, in their win against League One Stockport County. Second start of the season for Bergen County Buffon, big love. In Ipswich's 3-0 canter against Bristol Rovers, Calvin Phillips scored his first goal since scoring for Manchester City in a Champions League game, I think, December 2023, to many more. God bless him. And Leicester City, Ruud van Nistelrooy will now take his team to face Manchester United in the 4th round for a grudge slap battle. But I want to raise a glass to their defeated foe, Queen's Park Rangers, who were smashed 6-2 and have now suffered, this is incredible, 20 consecutive first match exits in the FA Cup dating back to 1995. God, the agony. But I guess at least your team are consistent. I also want to shout out Nottingham Forest, who made it 7 straight wins with a 2-0 victory over Luton Town. Amazing part of this game was, Raw, the two teams finished 17th and 18th in the Premier League last season. One staying up, Forest, just, the other going down. Forest are now 3rd in the Premier League. Luton have fired their super coach Rob Edwards, currently slumping 20th in the Championship. 2 points off the relegation zone. This is like, I mean, it's like Bob Dylan's Simple Twist of Fate in football beats.
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, yeah, and that is quite striking. I suppose what you would say is that Forest shouldn't have been 17th in the Premier League last year, and Luton were really kind of punching above their weight to be in that league at all. But it does just show, fine margins, sliding doors, all that.
Yeah, that's the only logical way to button that one quickly, because we do need to finish with the big one, the local report. Leeds United 1, League Two's Harrogate Town 0. Raw, we all know you'd live in Harrogate. You are actually the mayor. A game, a bit like Detroit's Tony Suburbs. I guess Birmingham, Michigan, having to play the Detroit Lions. The game, attendance 35,584. Harrogate tweeted, biggest we've ever competed in front of in our 100-plus year history. 68 places between these two teams. Harrogate, incredible nickname, the Sulphurites, were full of fight. They took 4,000 fans to Leeds. Cue funny social media posts of cavalcades of Ferraris making their way down a mountainside. The publicity dimension of this moment, big for the club. They average, I think, half of that 4,000 for their regular home fixtures in League Two, where they're currently 21st. So this is manna from heaven. Roy, you wrote a brilliant piece about your hometown club. You tweeted, I wrote about Harrogate, a place famous for lots of things: water, tea, scones, white Land Rover Evoques. But that's always been neutral football territory, a town where everybody supports someone else. Harrogate Town, a change in that. How did you experience this war, this regional conflict in which you were utterly, giddily, totally involved as mayor of the very town they were playing?
Well, obviously, as mayor, I had a lot of civic duties to attend to. No, I thought it was really fascinating. Football does this all the time, and it's one of my favourite aspects of my job, where you have to think about a place differently, even if you know it incredibly well. I live 25 minutes, half an hour from Harrogate now. I grew up 15 minutes from Harrogate. It would never have occurred to anyone I knew when I was growing up to say they supported Harrogate Town. That was not a thing you did. Harrogate was technically Leeds territory. I suppose Leeds would have claimed it as kind of natural. You'd expect people in Harrogate to support Leeds, but there were always lots of Man United fans, lots of Liverpool fans, lots of Chelsea fans, the occasional Evertonian. It was neutral territory. It was a place that didn't, as far as it was concerned, didn't have a proper team. And what's really nice is to see that Harrogate Town are, I think, in quite an admirable way, kind of leaning into that. So they are putting a lot of emphasis on kind of getting kids from Harrogate to go to watch Harrogate Town, to make it a thing that you can do if you grow up in what is a very, very nice town with lots and lots of things to do. There's a real emphasis on making it a family place, a place where people feel comfortable taking children, so you can grow a first generation of actual people who identify as Harrogate Town fans. But they've also worked out that you're not going to convert the Leeds fans who live there. There's 160,000 people in Harrogate. It's more than big enough to support a Leeds team. You're not going to convert the Leeds fans or the Man United fans or the Liverpool fans to make Harrogate their priority. But you can be their touch point with live football. You can be their local team. You can be their second club. And yeah, they took 4,000 to Leeds, and they every so often when people went to pick up tickets, they had to tell them, they gave a lot of tickets to like local kids through the youth teams and stuff. And when the coaches went to pick up the tickets, they said, maybe just tell the kids not to wear Leeds colours. And in most of those cases, someone told me, the coaches said, look, that's not really going to be a problem. Most of those kids will support Manchester City anyway. But they wanted to go and support Harrogate. They wanted to go and support the place they were from in its big moment on the national stage. And I think that is the glory of the FA Cup.
I find it very moving, Raw. I really do. To a generation of up the Sulphurites tattoos for the next generation of Harrogate dwellers.
The chant at what I think of as Wetherby Road, which is the stadium, but it's now sponsored by somebody, I can't remember who. The Exercise Stadium, I think. Didn't know Exercise itself was owned by a company.
It's owned by Cole Palmer.
Maybe Cole Palmer's patented that as well. Apparently the chant that they get from the first minute is, you're just a town full of tea shops. And you know what? That's true, and it's a compliment.
Oh, bro, let's tie this together with a letter from our mailbag. By the way, thanks to everybody who writes. meninblazers@gmail.com. You light up our life. This one from Graham Cover in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. God, I can't believe there's people in South Dakota listen to our crap. Hello, Big G. Graham writes, you both cover so much football. It's always on to the next for you, or do you stay connected to your subject matter? What a good question. And has a story you've ever written or covered had a surprising, hopefully positive impact that you didn't expect before you began? Raw?
Yes, some of them. I'm not very good. I'm not actually that good at kind of maintaining. I basically think that I'm bothering people whenever I kind of get in touch for a story. And I'm never as good as I should be at like maintaining my connection to them, but some of them do. So Harrogate, I've spent a week or so reporting on that, and that will have forged contacts and brought me into touch with people who who I'll keep up with, and it may well be that there are other things down the road that I can do on Harrogate for Harrogate. It happens with some stories, that you kind of stay in touch with people and they influence your life, or they give you ideas for other stories. That's always quite helpful as well, when you suddenly realise that maybe there's another aspect to something that you could be doing. In terms of like direct impacts, not many, but I did want to stop James Maddison signing for Liverpool. So, pluses and minuses.
How did you do that?
It was when he was at Coventry, and I had a friend who worked at Coventry, and there was some rumour about him going to Liverpool, I think, and I just texted my friend at Coventry. I wasn't even covering Liverpool at this stage, and I think they said, look, it's broadly right. And so I wrote a little story. It was when I was working for the Times of London. I wrote a little story saying Liverpool were considering signing, Coventry hotshot James Maddison, and Liverpool assumed, I think, that Maddison's camp had leaked it to try and generate more interest. So they pulled out of the deal thinking he wasn't quite the right character. And he went to Norwich instead. So Spurs fans can thank me that James Maddison plays for them. Because obviously if he'd gone to Liverpool, he probably wouldn't be playing for Spurs. How James Maddison feels about that, I don't know.
God, I've got so many unbelievable questions. We're going to do a show where you just address James Maddison directly and apologise. But I want to thank you, Graham, for your kind words. Unlike James Maddison, I've got to say, Raw's work has always had a tremendous impact on me. I always see football as like a mirror to society that surrounds it, the politics, the history, the culture, the bigger stories. And I do think Rory's writing, long before we started working together, really captured that best. So his work's actually had a tremendous impact on me. But in terms of impact, I've got to say your question is super timely. It's something that I really loved about this weekend. Back in 2017, we made a short film series about some of the 13 and 14-year-olds across the United States who are beginning to thrive in youth academies across the nation. We shot a magical one about a 13-year-old centre-back, Prince Amponsah, who we found. He lived in the Bronx, real basketball country in his words. And he was a super smart kid, really brilliant, a Ghanaian immigrant, lived with his mum. She didn't speak very much English at all. Football was his everything, his being. He was a math whiz, and he talked about solving equations constantly on the field. He played centre-back for NYCFC and the US under-14 team, and we followed him. We filmed him. We journeyed with him. As he did 4 or 5 times a week, he used to take 2.5-hour trains and buses across New York to get to NYCFC's youth academy. Kid would take on his own after school 3 trains and a bus at night, do his homework on it all the way there, 2.5 hours train, and then the reverse commute home over and over and over. And then he ended up at Wake Forest, which I was so delighted by. What an incredible achievement through football. And that kid always stayed with me, because of the way he talked, with such emotion, such intelligence, focus, clarity, about how he intentionally, this is a 13-year-old, he said back then, how he works to surround himself with positive energy, because negative energy represses you. I've often thought about his words, to be candid, a lot through this pandemic that we lived through and beyond, because, blow me down. Prince Amponsah is now 21 years of age, got himself a Wake Forest degree in economics and communication, and this weekend it was announced that he has signed a homegrown contract to play with NYCFC. And to see that boy grow into the man he is, seeing him in current day reality, as opposed to the little kid at the end of the film. I asked him to shut his eyes and dream of what he sees in the future, and his voice cracked with emotion. And a tear ran down his face as he talked about imagining himself as a 6-foot centre-back, shutting down opponents in massive games. To see him become that, despite the fact that only 1% of academy players make it to professional football, that journey, this kid, living his truth, fills me with a sense of, even me, undentable optimism. Kind of thing we all need in this time of chaos. So to Prince Amponsah, to NYCFC, to Dreams, and and the tenacity to make them real. It is so bloody beautiful. Raw.
That's lovely. That's a lovely story.
I know you were waiting for me to be cynical at the end.
I thought there'd be a punchline, but there's not.
Not even. By the way, a story so beautiful that even I can't see a dark side. Raw. That is it. I'm off to Chicago tonight. We've got a fine interview. Arsenal fans with a quite lovely Riccardo Cagliafiore on our YouTube, and that drops Wednesday. Subscribe, don't miss a minute. We have a very, very beautiful conversation with Ryan Reynolds dropping, I'll just say imminently. Subscribe to our newsletter via our website for more on that. But Raw, huge love to you. You've experienced your gutters being cleaned in this podcast, looking after your dog on your own. You've done it all.
It's been a roller coaster. I'm not looking after my dog on my own, to be fair. I don't even know where my dog is. He's disappeared somewhere. I apologise about the guttering, but you will rest, easier in the knowledge that we have adequate rain protection now, Rog. I know it's important to you.
That's all we listen for. You Crown Prince of Harrogate. This is Rog sending you big love. Let's not take a second of watching football together for granted and courage.